Welcome to Podfic Galore. I'm your horrible online reader, Goldskythe. I read out loud fanfictions for you busy bees, free of charge and no strings attached. Today I will continue reading the Silmarillion / Lord of the Rings fic by Bloodwing Blackbird from Archive of Our Own called And Now Each Night I Count the Stars. I hope you can at least try to enjoy my voice, and I will try my best for you with the equipment available to me. Note, this fic is rated explicit. On with the show. And now each night I count the stars. Chapter 21. The sons of Elrond rode fast, and for all Halbarad's impatience, he was hard-pressed to keep pace with them. The long days on horseback faded into nights, where he could still feel himself moving even as he laid upon the ground and tried to sleep. His nights were filled with dreams of fire and horses and ships and songs, all jumbled together so that it was hard to tell where the prophecy stopped or started. "Where shall we begin our hunt, do you think?" asked Elladan, as they made camp somewhere in Dunland. "Should we not return to the Entwash?" said Elrohir. "I don't think so," said Halbarad. "If it was there, it was more than a year hence. If we were searching for his remains, I should say that was where we should seek, but if he lives, as I now believe, I find it hard to see any reason he would still be there." "By that reasoning, he could be anywhere in the whole of Middle-earth," said Elladan. "At least we know there's a trail there to find." "One more than a year old," returned Elrohir, "and not anywhere. If we assume that he intended to return, something of which, I'm sorry, Halbarad, I'm still not entirely convinced, then some power must have prevented him." "Do you think that there is a chance that Saruman holds him?" asked Halbarad. Elladan shook his head. "I do not. After this, I'm not certain that I trust the wizard, but I think that he is keen to protect himself. If he has played a role in whatever happened here, he'd not want to risk keeping the evidence of it so close at hand." He frowned and prodded at the fire. "What about the mountains? We know well enough that there are many places that one might come to woe in their passes, even without any seeking harm to the traveler, but also plenty of strongholds of orcs. There are rumors of darker power there as well. A fire beneath the mountains." "It could be," said Elrohir. Halbarad considered. "You said that your father did not know that he lived, not until recently?" he asked. "Forgive me, for I do not understand the art. What does that mean? How does he sense him now if he did not before?" Illidan glanced at his brother, who nodded. "I'm not certain I understand it myself. There is a way, among the elves, of speaking thought to thought. Some are more skilled at it than others, but it takes effort. It is strongest between those who are very close." He gestured between himself and his brother, and Halbarad nodded. One did not have to spend much time with the twins before becoming convinced that there were whole conversations flying between them. "Father says that when he tried to reach Maklor's thought, it has always been close to him, an emptiness that he could not penetrate. They've never spoken this way." "So then," Eldon spread his hands, "you see the difficulty? He said that when he sought for Maklor in his mind, after we found his harp, and he found instead a deep darkness, and thus believed that he had fallen. But now both of you and he say that he lives," finished Elrohir. "Then something had somehow hidden him from my dreams as well as from your father," said Halbarad, thoughtful. "And now somehow he is free of it," said Elladan. "You two seem to have an idea," said Halbarad. "We think that you do as well," said Elrohir, throwing another branch upon the fire. "I can only think one power that could do such a thing." "You think that the enemy holds him," Halbarad said, "or held him." "As do you." Halbarad's breath caught. It was a thought he had been reluctant to put into words, even to let himself finish, but denying it would change nothing. But then, something must have changed. "I agree," said Elladan, "but all that only brings us back to the same question. Where do we begin our search?" "Minas Tirith," said Halbarad, with a certainty he didn't quite feel. "If he went so far south, there's a good reason to think he would have come to the city at some point in his travels. We may at least gather news there. And if our own seeking takes us further east, well, passing through the city becomes a direct route as any." "'Tis a good thought," said Elrohir. I have not been to Minas Tirith in many years. The last time I visited, there was this girl. Elena interrupted. Who would be a crone by now if he still lives at all, brother? Halbarad managed a wan chuckle at Elahir's expression and rolled himself into his cloak. They reached the walls of Minas Tirith in early morning, the air soft with rain that had yet to fall. On Halbarad's urging, they had ridden through the night to reach the city, as if one night could make any difference after so long a delay. The guards at the outer gate directed them to an inn in the first circle of the city. Halbarad was tired, but he could not have rested, for he was filled with strange, thrumming sort of energy. While the sons of Elrond tended to the horses, Halbarad went walking through the early morning quiet of the streets, glad for a chance to orient himself to the city, overwhelming in its grandeur, at least to the eyes of a ranger who had only ever known the ruins. Soon enough the city began to wake, all the activity and traffic seeming to flow towards some central point. Halbarad let himself be drawn along its wake, and soon found himself in an open place where a market was beginning its day. The goods were strange to his eyes. Things that in the north would have been unfathomable luxuries, here laid out as if commonplace. Even a city at war, it seemed, could spare some time for indulgences. Spring must have come quicker this far south, for the stands were a riot of fresh fruits and flowers, and Halbarad wandered amongst it all, feeling rather overwhelmed, and wishing he had decided to stay at the inn. Still, there would be no better place for news, so he walked about, stopping occasionally to speak to the vendors, not entirely certain what he might be seeking. He introduced himself as a traveller, and named himself Turamund, which should have wrenched at his heart, but instead just made him smile. He asked bland questions about their crops, about the weather, about their steward. He sampled their wares, making himself a fine breakfast on bits of fruit and tiny chunks of cheese. He tried to hide his true questions among the fripperies and small talk, asking them just as blandly. Have you had many travelers? Have there been any strangers in the city? None of the answers held anything of interest to him, but he nodded along, examining their wares before moving on to the next vendor. He was growing wary of this, his early excitement worn thin, when he came to a stand where an old man sold baskets. What are these made of? He asked, his smile stiff. Oh, they're hazel, sure enough. Cut the switches when they're young and soft enough for weaving. He turned the basket over and started to show Halbarad something, but Halbarad was not looking. Behind the old man there was a young girl, freckled and friendly, watching him from the back of the tent. It wasn't her eyes, bright blue and sparkling, that caught his interest. It was her hat, a battered thing of straw, wide-brimmed and decorated with feathers and bits of ribbon. He made his excuses to the man and walked away quickly as he could, heart beating fast, then found a place from which he could watch the tent and settled in to wait. The girl left the tent after a bit, and Halbarad followed, at a distance. He kept his eyes locked on the terrible hat, watching as it bobbed through the crowd of people, and when she turned away from the market, he quickened his steps until he was beside her. She startled, trying to dash away from him, and he grabbed her elbow, sudden sharp panic as losing the trail again. I'll scream, she said. Halbarad released her. I didn't mean to frighten you. Well, you did. She took a step back and straightened her sleeves. What do you want? Where did you get that hat? This thing? She pushed at the brim. Why, I traded for it. Halbarad gritted his teeth. Who did you trade, and when? A fellow. He was out of town. Funny. I can't remember too much about him, now that you ask. Whatever you remember, please. He had dark hair. Oh, and he wore gloves, even though it was hot. I remember that. And he talked like he had a cold. I was selling hazelnuts, but he didn't have any money, so I said I'd take a trade. Halbarad's heart was in his throat, but he managed to be polite. It was only fair after giving her a fright. Thank you, he said. What was this? Oh, she thought for a moment. It was late summer, since we had the nuts. Not this one past, though, the year before. She stopped and looked at him. Are you all right? Sorry, he said, clearing his throat. I was looking for someone, but if he was here so long ago, I fear I have missed my chance to find him. Oh, she said. Well, I know one thing. If you want to find someone around here, you should ask the guard. The captains, I should say, know everyone who comes through these walls. Halbert laughed at that. One thing he thought he could be absolutely certain of, and it was that Maklar would never have crossed paths with any of the city's authorities, not deliberately, not unless, well, perhaps it was worth investigating after all. He didn't think he would find Maklar jailed in Minas Tirith, but he would not put it past Maklar to have done something to have attracted their notice. "Thank you for advice, lass," he said, pulling out his purse. "Can you tell me where I can find them? Oh, and Boromir returned to Osgiliath the day after Faramir acquired his elf. "Ah, brother, what have you done?" Boromir asked, twitching aside the blanket to look at their guest. A fever had set in overnight, and Faramir's questions looked as if they had to remain unanswered. The elf barely woke, and when he did, it was only to stare past them through eyes that were glazed and unseeing, trapped in dark dreams. "We found him in a Morgul Vale. I could not leave him as he was." "You know what you should have done." Boromir turned away from the elf, already dismissing him as lost. He had always been more practical of the two. "You know it's just more suffering for them this way." Sometimes it was hard not to hear their father when Boromir spoke. Boromir looked away. "Ah, sorry," his brother said, tucking him into one of his warming hugs. "I know you've always been one for taking in strays. Remember Ecthelion?" Of course Faramir remembered. It had been the great tragedy of his young life, which was something of a shame in itself, but Faramir could hardly help that he hadn't been old enough to miss his mother. Ecthelion had been a mouse that Faramir had found. He had been hurt, trodden on, perhaps, with an injured leg that dragged behind him. With Boromir's help, Faramir had hidden him in his room, and together they secreted away scraps of food for him, feeding him little bits of the things that the two boys thought a mouse would like. And it felt good to care for something. At least until his father had found it. Denethor had not appreciated the homage to a former steward, and had had the thing drowned. Faramir had cried for a week, and never quite forgiven his father, but it seemed that his brother had taken a different lesson from that experience. "I remember," he said. "Now, Captain," said Hodor, "this one's got a better chance than most, being an elf and that." He held out his hand. "Welcome back, sir." Faramir trailed behind as Boromir greeted the men in the healer's tent, and then outside to collect reports of the lieutenants. He wondered if the relief that waved in the air like a banner was his own or the men's. "What news of our father?" Boromir asked as they walked. "He sends his greeting," said Boromir. It was a well-intentioned lie, so Faramir did not point it out. "He worries. He sees the same thing we do, the mustering darkness. He's sending more men to fortify the garrison. I gave him your report, and you'll have to assign some more to Ithilien as well." "Archers?" Boromir asked. "He says that he will try." Faramir nodded. It would have to do. They walked on, Faramir lingering a few steps behind as Boromir clasped men's hands and asked about their families, easy in a way that Faramir had thought he was too old to envy. They finally made their way to the bridge, those broad stone arches that sprang across the water, graceful as something that was built before Gondor's waning. "Oh, the move's fast," murmured Faramir. 3 riders were stopped at the far side of the bridge, the guard there clearly putting them to the question. Boromir squinted and then laughed. "Brother, we'll not be getting fellows like this. We'll be lucky to get a dozen lads whose balls haven't even dropped." He grimaced. "Sorry." The apology made it worse, so Boromir ignored it. "I take your meaning." The newcomers sat their horses with confidence of hardened fighters. 2 were tall and somehow dazzling, despite the weathered and road-worn clothing that did not match the quality of their weapons or their mounts. The third one was the one who had dismounted to speak to the guard. He could easily have been one of Faramir's own rangers, even down to the green cloak and careworn face. The guard saw them coming and waved them over. "What is this?" asked Boromir. "Captain, these 3 wish to cross the bridge." "Have they the permission of the tower?" "No, sir." "Well then, do not let them cross," as if it were so simple. Perhaps for Boromir it was. Boromir had absolute faith that his brother could and would triumph over any foe that he might encounter. For himself, Boromir did not want to waste any of their men against those who could well be allies. "Wait, please," said the man, the one who was definitely only a man. "If you will not let us pass, that is one thing, but please, just tell us." He swallowed and looked at Faramir, his eyes green as grass and pleading. We're seeking a friend of ours. We have reason to believe that he came this way. Faramir looked at the guard, who shook his head. No strangers have crossed the Undoing, not by this bridge, not with the tower's permission. Not within the year, at least, Faramir said, watching the man for reaction. The green eyes widened and locked on his own. The friend we're seeking would have come this way over a year ago. Faramir narrowed his eyes and leaned back against the parapet. Your friend? Your friend cost us supplies we could ill afford to lose. The three of you are just fortunate that he didn't cost any lives, or you would find your welcome even less. He straightened and pointed. If spies and arsonists are the company you keep, then you are not welcome in these lands. He moved to turn away. Wait, please, what did he do? Begged the man. Faramir answered. He crossed the bridge in secret and in disguise after burning down 2 of our supply tents. One of the strange ones laughed. Oh, but I think we have finally found the trail. Captain, the other spoke, we would be happy to reimburse you for the damage, if you can tell us anything else about our friend. We know nothing, said Boromir with a laugh. He took off to the east, and good riddance, I say. Boromir closed his eyes and took a steadying breath. Brother, he said softly, I hadn't had a chance to tell you. He's in a tent across the river. We just left him. That? Exclaimed Boromir. That corpse is the one they came here for? Boromir could only shrug. The man, Halbarad, turned on him with eyes wide and desperate. He is here? One of the tall ones reached out for his shoulder as if to steady him, but he pulled loose and grabbed Faramir's arms, tight enough to bruise. Please, take me to him, or bring him to me. I don't care. Just let me see him. His voice was rough and fervent, and even beneath his brother's disapproving gaze, Faramir would not refuse him. This way, he said, and walked past his brother and back to the eastern bank. The three dismounted and led their horses behind as they walked, the curious eyes of the garrison watching them all. The ranger didn't seem to notice, almost vibrating beside Faramir, as if he would have run, flown, if only he had known the way. I should warn you, said Faramir beneath his breath. Your friend, he's not, well, he lives, but I do not know how long that will last. We've done what we could. We were going to send him to the city tomorrow, if he lives that long. He needs healing that we can't give here. If he lives, that is enough, Halbarad said. Faramir nodded and led him into the tent. He knew when the man saw his friend, for he went quite still beside him. A small word of advice, said Faramir, gesturing at the scrapes on his face. Start with Elvish, if you know any. Halbarad swallowed and nodded, then went to the stranger's cot, where he knelt beside him. Faramir turned away from that reunion. It was none of his business. I'm glad to say he has some friends, after all. Might have gotten here too late, mind, but better than never, I suppose. Hador had come up behind him. You don't think he'll pull through? Asked one of Halbarad's companions. Hard to say, said Hador. I don't work much on his kind, or your kind, maybe I should say. He needs more than what we can give here, it's certain. Maybe even more than they can do in the tower. How did he come to be here? Asked one. I found him, just northwest of Minas Morgul, explained Faramir. It happens sometimes. Escapes, maybe, or maybe they let them go when they've no more use for them. No one have ever lived this long. The two looked between each other, two faces so alike it could have been a mirror. We'll bring him to our father, said one. Well, I don't know who your father is, said Hador, and likely I should recommend against moving him much, but he'll die here, so may as well try. He shrugged, but Faramir knew better than to think the unconcerned anything but an act. I hope those horses of yours are fast as they look. There's more work with this fever than just his wounds. Many get sick from spending too much time in the Vale, so it could be that, or that he was unfortunate enough to be held in the tower itself. Well, no telling what they might have done to him. Put him in. He cleared his throat. An old man likes to give an advice, and here's some you won't like. If he does pull through, you'll all be careful of him. I've heard tell that folks that go in, well, they come out different, and not just in a ways you might expect. They nodded gravely and carried on, plying Hador with questions about their friend's condition, how they might best sustain him on their road. Faramir went back to where Halbarad sat still beside the cot, one of the frail hands clasped between his own. He cleared his throat when Faramir approached, but did not wipe away his tears. "He doesn't know who I am," he said, in a voice bleached pale as bone. "Who is he?" asked Faramir. Halbarad smiled and shook his head. "He is still my blackbird," he said, looking up at Faramir as if he'd understand what that meant. "It's as simple as that. He flew away, but now it's time to bring him home." Faramir and Boromir saw them off at the western gate of Osgiliath, their coffers fat and somewhat with over-generous reimbursement for the damage the garrison had suffered a year hence. That had left Boromir in a more forgiving mood, and he had already had a clerk drafting a supply requisition from the city. Once the dust from their hooves had settled, Faramir turned to his brother. "What then shall we tell our father of what happened today?" Boromir looked into the fading western light, then turned back to his brother with a smile. "Nothing, Faramir. Nothing at all." End of chapter 21. Stay tuned.